Okay, ladies and gentlemen, welcome. Welcome to the Paragon Theater in Coral Springs. My name is Ed Casas. I will be your guide today. Maybe if you saw the ad, it said the three-fingered mummies of South America, but specifically we're going to be talking what I call Xenoanthropology 101. And feel free to take pictures or film, share live. That would be great, because part of the reason I'm here is that I'm part of a grassroots effort to get the scientific truth out there. And this scientific truth is pretty big. So a little bit about myself. I do have a degree in anthropology and social sciences with a certificate in ethnic studies. When I got that degree, my family was very skeptical of it. And they said, "What are you going to do with that degree?" I said, "I don't know, work in a museum." Well, in 2002, I started volunteering at the Graves Museum of Archaeology and Natural History in Dania Beach, Florida. And that volunteer position turned into education director because they had a lot of people coming in and out of the doors, and so I had no choice but to sort of take that role. But other fun things I did there was organize the volunteers, do the tours, and do classroom hands-on lectures for the children of Broward County. That museum sadly did close, but it did provide me with lots of opportunities to actually do archaeology. I have to confess, when I did my degree, I had no idea I would actually be doing archaeology. So that turned out to be a really cool thing where I was getting paid. But archaeology in Florida, you have to remember, is very hot. So I must have dug 50 holes before finding one artifact. And it was fun because I was able to pick out the dig location. I saw a tree grove, and we would do these surveys in old sugarcane fields, many times for the U.S. Army. The U.S. Army would have to, they're fixing the problems that they started by stopping the flow of the Okeechobee. So we would have to go in and do a survey before they reintroduce the water, make sure there was nothing too interesting there. And yeah, I picked out a tree island because, if you know, many of the Native Americans would live on these tree islands when the water levels would rise. And so we went there, and sure enough, I happened to be the guy working the sieve, because you work in two teams, and it takes you about a half hour a hole many times. You're going down, is it a meter? I think it's a meter. And I was on the sifter when I pulled out a nice white chert arrowhead. So that was a really cool experience to me. Some of you might be fans of the Ancient Aliens, and what is his name, by the way? Do we know the Ancient Aliens guy's name? the Greek guy. Suklos, thank you. And his first name was what? Giorgio. Giorgio Suklos, Graham Hancock, Billy Carson. You probably see a lot of those guys. I don't know how many of them actually have experience in archaeology, working at a museum, and are working with these bodies as scientific evidence. So thank you for coming. Again, I suggest this is a paradigm-shifting event. Most of the images are from Thierry Jamin and his site, the-alien-project.com. He works with the Inkari Institute and the Ica University. They work in tandem. Also, my friend here, Gonzalo Chavez, started Tridactyls.org. Now, a little story. When my friend here on the camera, Christy, was making my website, she says, "Do you want Tridactyls.org or do you want Tridactyls.com?" I'm like, you know, I'm kind of the social sciences fun guy. Let's do .com. I said, save .org for the legit researchers. Year and a half later, we have the Tridactyls.org, and they were kind enough to give me early access to the CT scans and the x-rays. So some of the imagery you might see here may have never been seen before, because I've literally just screen captured that particular angle myself. I'm also glad to say that we juked Joe Rogan on this story. It took him, well, over a year to come around, and now he has access, and so now he's showing those same scans on his show. Trigger warning, CT images and x-rays of once living things. I am not responsible for cause of ontological shock or existential dread. Now, I asked people before I did the talk, is there anything that you think I should cover? And I do want to say that many of the Peruvians are a little upset that many of these bodies have been exported, if you will, to Mexico and across the world to various oligarchs from different nations. So The Peruvians do see that as they're part of their cultural heritage, and I do agree to an extent. But I'm just wondering how much science would not be done if the bodies were just still in Peru. Because Peru, their Ministry of Culture, was fighting against these being legitimate things. So if you do your own internet research, there is talk of dolls, or there is talk of mutilated humans. Now this is low fruit theories right here. That being said, and I don't show the body, there is one manipulated human child that looks like it was damaged to create the look of a tridactyl. I think what's important about that body is that since we do have it, we can show people the difference between a hand that's had its fingers removed and a hand with natural formation. So if you're familiar with Nazca, the Nazca lions are on these various ancient alien shows because the thought is you can't really see these unless you're up high in a plane or a balloon or something. And this one here is actually has the nickname the astronaut. And it's funny, before even the morphology of the tridactyls came out, they were suggesting that it depicts something with anomalous joints, which we will see. And here's another one here. I don't know, is that a two-headed creature or is that one of our tridactyl heads? And then this piece I think is important. They call it a trident. It shows a various tridactyl icons, maybe you'd call it a trident. So this is where these bodies were found, so that should be of interest to people. So this is a simple timeline I came up with. 2015, the specimens were discovered by Huaquero grave robbers. Okay, so that tends to put a bad light on the topic already, so people will think it's fake. But, you know, this is the way science and discoveries are. It's not clean and neat. 2016, they were brought to the adventurer outfitter who goes looking for lost cities in Peru, Thierry Jamin, a French national living in Peru. It wasn't until 2023 that I became involved when I saw them at the Mexican Congress. Not live, but online. These are some of the artifacts that were found. I don't know, are these artifacts from mythology and history? Is that something a deity might hold? Are these runic letters? This cross here, is that organic material? I can't tell. That's on the inside. Now this sort of shape here with these volutes, very common shape you'll see in the Middle East and Europe. And then this last one here, this reminds me of an artifact called the Garganian? I don't know how to pronounce that, actually. A Greek artifact used as a weapon against people. Now, part of my lecture is on steganography, that is, hidden imagery within the art. So, taking a look at this, I don't know, do you guys see any other alternate faces in there besides a face of a woman looking at you? Here's theory. There's rumored to be hundreds, if not thousands. Theory has appeared testifying to various government agencies. You know, again, he's just an adventurer in South America looking for lost cities. He wasn't looking for these things. They came to him because the Huaqueros didn't know what to do with them besides sell them. I understand that some bodies were going for $1 million. Two of the reporters involved from Mexico and South America, Mr. Masson here, his focus is on ufology, so he does a lot of different stories on this. He is frequently cited as a grifter or a scammer, but I think it's important to know that Jaime is not the lead investigator. He is not a medical practitioner, and he's also used to be a 60-minute reporter, so theoretically he has some legitimacy. I have been in contact loosely with both of these gentlemen. This is Joyce, who actually has a specimen named after him now. So I don't know if this photo was reenacted or not, but nonetheless, it looks pretty legit as to where you would find something like this. So here's one of the bodies in the hands of Dr. Konstantin Korotkov, and this is Dr. Dmitry Galetki of St. Petersburg University in Russia. They are some of the earliest investigators. This cave here is said to be full of a diatomaceous earth. Now, diatomaceous earth, if you're not familiar, you may use it for removing insects or putting in your pool filter. Some people may even ingest some. It is microscopic organisms. It's tiny microfossils. But what's interesting about diatomaceous earth is that it takes an industrial process to make these, because diatomaceous earth wasn't officially invented or invented until the 1800s. Two of the bodies in the Mexican Congress. In fact, I made a little replica here. You guys later can come down and look at these things. Okay. All right, again, let's start getting into the personnel, because I've also heard people say there's no real science being done. And so here is the team. Oh, what happened to Cliff? Cliff got deleted. Oh my gosh, didn't even notice. It's unfortunate. Clifford Miles has been super important to me. As a paleontologist, I was a paleotech. Him as a paleontologist, I felt like I could understand him. I understand what he was saying about the bodies. I felt like he was someone who was trustworthy. He owns a Canadian paleontological company. And most of his studies came from taking what Galetki did and going on with it. Zalsi Benitez, here's another one who's frequently dismissed. This guy is the forensic officer for the Mexican Navy, okay? Like, if you're looking for credibility, I don't know how much credibility you can get. And then Jose Rios is interesting because he was sort of skeptical at first, and then he came along too, and he's done his own studies as a biologist. There's not a lot of women's faces involved. This is one of two. And, you know, she's just a radiologist. We don't need an archaeologist for this. She's looking at these x-rays saying, these are congruous, these bones are connecting. There's no manipulation. So what's important about these two gentlemen is that Mr. Rangel here, he's actually published papers on it, so you can get in touch with his papers. You can see his studies. There is some question whether these papers have been uploaded to legitimate journal sites and whether or not they've been legitimately peer-reviewed. A lot of people are saying peer review, that's their focus. I'm a little more hands-on, and a matter of fact, I don't think we need peer review to go over what we have right now. Oh, and Dr. McDowell, so I talk about the Great White Hope, because there seems to be a little bit of racism against the Latino crew. And people keep saying, like, oh, well, it's Mexico, it's South America, they're corrupt. And that's like negative stereotype, unfortunately. It doesn't mean the whole country. Of course, we all have our problems. Go to Miami, right? There's corruption everywhere. I call it the Great White Hope because people are saying we need an American, and again, in a sort of bigoted way, we need a white American guy to look into this. Well, here he is. Here's the guy with a face that, you know, could have came off of television from the old days. So this guy just won recently the real award for being the most well-known, most documented forensic doctor. And he is out there now saying these bodies are authentic. So I don't know how many more officials people need, but there is a team on this. So there's been dozens of reports on the DNA. We have carbon-14 analysis. And again, we're a little unsure about the legitimacy of the journals and the peer reviews. So we're hoping McDowell and his team will make it happen. So this is showing you the various labs that have done the CT scans, what was examined, and how many years ago these CT scans are coming up, and then the actual year in AD. The most interesting one is this one here, 7,270 years old. Well, that brings us to the advent of civilization in Mesopotamia. What else is interesting about these? Oh, the beta analytics. That's here in Miami. So again, people are saying, oh, there's not legit sites doing, they don't know. There are people talking who don't know. And they're saying there's not legit sites that have done the studies. Here's the labs right here. There's a bunch of them. And they're all over the world too. So this is a great diagram here. It shows you the size of a human being and a couple of the hybrids, the young juvenile hybrids, the smaller ones that people might call grays because they sort of fulfill that ancient alien look. Wawita, this is probably the only image I have of her in this, is the actual human child that was manipulated. The large hands, which were just shown yesterday to people in Mexico. And then the smaller ones that they call insectoids. I don't think it's an appropriate name. They only have 4 limbs. I've been calling them xenomorph, but then, of course, that brings up the Aliens franchise, so not everyone likes that name either. So we're still working on nomenclature. I threw my nomenclature into the ring as well. 3 of the bodies known as the family covered in that diatomaceous earth. That's why they look so white in color. And a couple of the local doctors in South America. So let's see what this guy Irving has to say. The surprise is finding these organs in a very good state in spite of the results of the carbon-14 dating saying that it was very ancient. And then this gentleman's father. I want to highlight that these bodies are real. There's no discussion about this. So I'm going to overwhelm you with evidence today. And the first part is the medical evidence. So Maria, the human-sized tridactyl specimen, she has been studied probably the most significantly. She has wounds on her backside from a cat attack. I thought it was Josephina originally, but I think there's a lot of confusion with the specimens. And when they talk about like dolls and babies, that's why it's real important to make yourself familiar with the names. And so I always ask people, what's the name of the specimen are you talking about? Because Maria is different than Josephina and the little ones. So Maria has some damage to her underside from a large cat. In fact, I think some of the researchers think her tailbone was bitten off. I don't think that's it. We'll get to that in a little bit. This image right here, this is a good one. So that was never seen before. I screenshot that myself. And Billy Carson stole it and didn't give me credit. Billy Carson I also busted posting Dungeons and Dragons maps as ancient sites. Well, luckily, not only am I an archaeologist, but I'm a DM. So here's one of the DNA analysis on Maria. I think the most important thing out of all this, there's a lot of information to digest, such as 3% pan. That means Pantroglodytes, chimpanzee. So it's not saying that you and I we have chimpanzee in our background. It's saying that there's literally 3% chimpanzee in her background. But again, the most important thing might be right here, this 30%. It's coming up that Maria is only 30% human, 33% primate if you count the chimp. So this is Rangel's work, where he demonstrates that he believes that a hybrid chimpanzee somehow had children with a human. And the human populations are super interesting to me, Myanmar and the Han people of China. Why is that interesting to me? Because I had suggested early on in this discovery that these people, these beings, were the Naga of Indian myth, Hindu mythology, and the dragon people of China. You see, dragons and Nagas in Southeast Asia, in fact, I was at a restaurant and I was saying, and the waitress is like, they're the same. They know. They're the same. The Nagas and the dragons are the same mythology to them. And I think it's important that we'll see later that these aren't the monsters that knights slay from Western myth. Well, maybe they are. But not to those people. Those are the ancestors to people in Asia. Montserrat is interesting because of the gold disc upon her forehead. There is a myth in ancient Egypt where Horus impregnates Set by flinging his substance into Well, wait. Well, there's two different stories, I think. Either he flung his semen into Set, or Set ate lettuce that was tainted with the semen. Why is that? Why am I telling this horrible story? I'm telling you this horrible story because at the end of it, it is said Set produces a gold disc from his head. So we can call these all different names. I'm suggesting that these beings may be specific individuals from history. How do I know I hit it? Should I try again? Oh, look, there's my recording thing up top. I thought I made this shorter. So this is Montserrat. We're just going to do a quick go around her body just so you can see the tridactyl limbs. She is clutching, well, she's clutching her womb. I don't know about as much as her, but you can see the chimpanzee rib cage in Maria. That big barrel chest, that's a chimpanzee trait. And so here's one I don't even like to show too much myself, another kind of gory one here. This is the child within Montserrat, Raphael, and this is the hand that they pulled out, showing the phalanges, the carpal, the radius and ulna, and the humerus. So my favorite are these because they're less human than the hybrids, so I find them more interesting. These are 2 feet tall. I do have I have a little model skull here. So if you can imagine something coming up to my knee. Oh, hello. Josephina, of course, and Louisa have these metal implants. Not totally sure what they're for. Josephina has a fracture, so we thought maybe it was to support that, but it looks like a lot of the egg bearers have the metal implants. So I even suggested, are they feeding primates? Are those magnetic points for fake breasts? And it sounds weird, but there are Greek artifacts of these conical things meant to hold milk. So maybe there's something there. So we got all different angles of Miss Josephina there. We were looking at these things here. These very well could be infrared sensors, something like a snake would have, which makes sense if these things are possibly living underground. I also thought of I believe it's called a quipu, the Inca way of writing and keeping track of things is on knots and string. That's something you could actually, I could do math in the dark with that. You could send information to me without even talking, right? Just getting some close-ups here. This is probably important because a big part of my theory is their cordiform-shaped face, their heart-shaped face. And it starts in here. And this cordiform-shaped face is really not that different from a chimpanzee. It's kind of similar. Note, too, that underneath the brows here, underneath this supraorbital arch, are these almost like a triangular pattern going out to either side. That might have symbolic meaning to humans later on. More of Josephina showing X-ray, the scans. You can see here that she has what they call floating ribs. They're called gastralia, found today in crocodilians. So they have abdominal ribs. And it's important to keep track of this morphology, which we're going to see, because it's important to figuring out what these things are. The headless Victor Victoria. A nice and gory photo this one is. And there are at least, I don't know, there's several decapitated heads. One of these might be hers. Look at the pronounced cranial ridges that come off of the supraorbital arches. It could be things like those cranial ridges that provided myths on horned beings or ant people. Victoria's reads, I have two of these. This one is saying 64% unknown. So the other thing you'll hear about people, oh, the DNA is corrupted. Well, sure, there is some corruption, but we know where that corruption is, and that doesn't deny us an unknown percentage. It doesn't deny us 3% Homo sapiens. Is there pan listed here? No, there's cow. The cow is likely the contamination, we hope. And this is just another test on the same specimen. Is it? Now I'm like, wait a minute. I don't know if, now I have to look at my own slide here. Because that is, let's see. Okay, yeah, 3% Homo sapien right there. Okay. It just came out in different colors, maybe? I don't know. This one says green here. Anyway, the important matter to take away is it's 3%, and it is a lot of unknown. High percentage of unknown. Okay, welcome. Have a seat right in the front. Okay, you're just in time for our 1-foot creatures. Now, a lot of times you'll hear talk about M types. That means hybrids that look like Maria. J types, that means the small ones that look like Josephina. This one they're calling the S type. Probably most interesting are these spinal eminences. I'm not entirely sure what they're for. They could be to help in buoyancy because they are pneumatic, meaning they have air-filled chambers. They could be for thermal regulation, so they're going to collect sunlight. They could also be for support for cutaneous respiration. Keep in mind, so far, many of these beings do not have lungs. So if they don't have lungs, that was my first clue into saying, oh, these are definitely amphibians. They're breathing cutaneously through their skin. And, of course, Suye has eggs. I tried to twist the researchers' arms. I'm like, hey, you got anything for me for my lecture tomorrow? But they're keeping all of this hush-hush. My guess is that these likely are 0% human. If Victoria is 3%, these are like 0. Maybe they're 1. But we really need the DNA in these. And I think once we have that, we'll be able to combine it with and cross-reference it to the other species, other specimen types, and everything will start to become clear. Okay, now she looks like she also has some implants. There is talk that she may also have just some sort of cutaneous skin, so she has like plates possibly. Not sure on that. Again, this one's still in the oven, so we'll have to find out what the researchers find out about this one. I say the researchers. I'm one, okay? And just showing you all the different bodies, all their different names. I had mentioned earlier that when talking about these, if someone's saying such and such is fake, you got to say which one. You know, even if they say, well, the bone is. Some people said the imagery shows a bone that's displaced and moved. Okay, which one, which hand? Because once you're done, let's just say that they're right about that bone. There's still the whole body you have to disprove and 21 other specimens. So get to work. I'm kind of proud of this one because this is a screenshot right from my own computer, just showing that I have access to the CT scans and the x-rays. Thank you again, Tridactyls.org, for that. It's been super rewarding. And I have used it. It wasn't just for social media. Science has come from it. Boop, boop. Joyce here is the largest one. Tallest, I think 5'10", 5'11", getting up there. Also, Joyce is the only one that has exterior male genitalia. Now, I always come up with my own names for some of them. To me, Joyce looks like Akhenaten. And there is some little discrepancy of whether they found Akhenaten's body or not. Santiago, one of the juveniles, kind of cute looking in actuality. That's Alberto. So I'm not going to go into all this in detail, but feel free to read it while we're going through these here. We're going to go through the skeletal morphological traits. If you see a little trident, a little psi symbol after it, that means either I discovered it myself or I added some clarity to it. So what are we talking about? We're talking, obviously, they're tridactyl limbs, and people say, well, they just cut off 2 fingers. But you got to keep in mind, not only do they have 3 fingers, but they have an extra phalange. So now you can say, yeah, they cut off a finger, but well, how did they get the extra phalange in there? And I've actually gotten in debates with some guys online. One guy, what was he? I don't know. He was some sort of scientist. And I'm like, could you explain how they put the extra phalange in there? And his scientific explanation was, well, they somehow shoved it in there. That's all you got? So that's not really, it's not really an explanation. Ulni and tibiae. So the little ones, not the hybrids, because the hybrids appear to have human arms. They have 1 singular forearm and 1 singular lower leg bone. Pneumatized skeleton, likely for, when we think of pneumatized skeletons, you might think of birds. They have to have lighter bones. But it could also be used for floating in water. Interclavicle is a furcula that you'll find on Thanksgiving in your wishbone. Gastralia we talked about are these stomach bones found in crocodiles. Spinal eminences are only on Suye types. A pyramid bone within the skull that could be, we don't think it's for hearing because it doesn't have a connection to an auditory canal. I suggest that it could be for maybe even noise making and vocalizations possibly. Monocondylic skull. So there's my little psi symbol. So nobody's talking about that. So we have 2 condyles on our skull meeting with our atlas to a pivot point of articulation. These guys only have 1. And only reptiles and birds have 1. Cutaneous respiration, that implies an amphibian. Craniosolemic chamber. So the researchers noticed there was limited to no differentiation between the skull and the rest of the body. Which, to the skeptics, they're like, ha, fake. But it turns out that young amphibians, young salamanders, have limited connection between the 2 areas. And if we go back in time, creatures like cephalopods, like mollusks and squids and arthropods, various invertebrates have limited connection. Peristaltic tubular heart, again, that is something you'll find. We actually, as humans, when we were born as children, we have a long tubular heart as a fetus. So this is a trait that is carried over from the deep past. So here's one of the ones I'm most proud of. I even gave it a name. So I kept noticing this important concave indentation behind the supraorbital eyebrow arches there. And there are these Japanese mythical creatures called kappa, where they hold water in their head. So I called this the kappa, which is, I have to do the etymology on that, on the Japanese word, because kappa is also Indo-European, our Western languages, and we learned that kappa shows that head and cup have the same word origin. Head and cup. Within that, I predicted there would be a pineal gland, and guess what? When they released the scans, I found it. Okay, so they probably have sequential hermaphroditism. That's partially based on mythology. Plenty of myths. I think even Yahweh says, I was Shaddai, and I'm Yahweh now. Set was able to go from male to female. Loki had children. So when I hear the myths, I'm at a stage now where the myths and the archaeology are predicting the biology. So, but I'm not just basing on that. This is all part of, this is what an amphibian would do. And amphibians can do this. Do you know some creatures can actually switch sexes and then go back? Okay, what else we got here? Oviviparous reproduction. I guess it's partially me. I put a little symbol there, but it's in the scans. You can see that there are larvae being born from eggs within the body. I used to write gastric as in stomach, They don't really have stomachs. Parthenogenesis. Oh boy, look at that time. Parthenogenesis was also from the mythology. Komodo dragons can do this. They can self-impregnate. Sequential embryogenesis. So it looks like there are scans of the fetuses within the eggs that have eggs within them. So they might actually be born pregnant. Metamorphic lifestyle is totally mine. Throughout the archaeology, I kept seeing two-limbed, serpentine bottom beings, and I was saying, oh, they're telling us something. We're going to find out that these beings go through a metamorphosis like an axolotl from Mexico. Salamanders, many species, have front limb emergence first. So if you're familiar with frogs and tadpoles, their back limbs come out first. Facultative quadrupedalism, that's been a theory of mine since the very beginning. I don't think they were completely bipedal like we show the bodies. Those wrists and those arms and that interclavicle implies something that could switch to four legs. Diatraumus life cycle, so in their skulls was evidence of saline minerals. So your first thought might be the ocean. The mythology has led me to believe that it was likely lakes, and like an eel, they may have started in saltwater lakes and then moved on to freshwater lakes. Hydrostatic limbs, that means their limbs can be inflated with liquid to make them work. So plenty of mythology and petroglyphs of what I call anomalous limbed beings, serpentine beings. And so when, again, the skeptics say, those joints don't even look like they work right, I wasn't worried because I had already seen the archaeological record. So hydrostatic limbs would make sense. They're said to have a neck that can extend, like E.T. How would they do that? Likely through some sort of hydrostatic. So what could we compare this to? Insects? Squids? So this is just showing you that if we were to start at the top and make note of their furcula, their wishbone, well, that implies that between that and the gastralia, that these creatures have to come, they're at least morphologically speaking, their morphology has to come from hundreds of millions of years in the past. Yes, please take pictures, please share. So as we go through there, oh, they have cutaneous respiration. Well, that's going to take me back another 100 million years. If they actually can be born pregnant and have parthenogenesis, these are also very old traits. And then we get down to these invertebrate traits. This is implying a morphology that's hundreds of millions of years old. So a lot of people want to call these aliens or extraterrestrials. I say no. I say they're terrestrials. They're from here. This is a scan that I personally yoinked from their footage. I was told by an oppositional paleontologist that I was experiencing pareidolia, and I wasn't seeing what I was seeing. And at the same time, he was trying to sell me a llama skull cut in half, saying it was a tridactyl head. There's the kappa that I suggest that, while it was known by the researchers, I gave it the name, and I stand by it, especially since I found the pineal gland there. And you can see some other of the traits of the creatures. Some of the hands, including the large hand, which has a metal disc in it that looks like it was pierced by something. These hands were just shown yesterday to ufologists and U.S. representatives. Nice close-up of the feet. The skin is of interest. It has scutes. It has a cross-hatching pattern. And then the close-up of the fingerprints you see are different than our own. Instead of concentric circles, they're perpendicular lines. Perpendicular? Parallel. Parallel lines. Thank you, Ed. Close-up of the scutes. And a direct close-up of the science here, 1,600 times microscope here. I want to point out there's another a female doctor involved, so it's not just males. She's German, I believe. This is not normal skin as we know it. I'm not saying it's reptilian, but it's reptilian because the scales, like as you would see on mummified reptiles. Close-up of that interclavicle we discussed, the furcula. Close-up of the gastralia, which looks like Victoria here had a little accident, perhaps. So while the researchers did note the lower sacrum, the lower spine bones were somewhat fused, it was myself who I realized, oh, wait a minute. This is what's called a urostyle, okay, found in frogs after they lose their tail. So Maria doesn't have a tailbone, and Maria is a human-sized creature. If Maria doesn't have a tailbone and doesn't have a navel, what does that tell you about her birth and her lifeway? This is the singular condyle. Again, this is another one of my own discoveries. I haven't heard anyone else talk about that. We'll have to see when the next science report comes out how much of my stuff is in there and if they give me any credit for it, right? I have a feeling in this business I'm not going to get a lot of credit, so I have to get my word out there. So there are similar structures, some animals with similar structures to the S-types. So we have that's an amphibian right there. Whoa. I think I may have screwed up. There we go. And it's a little infographic I made because I suggest that due to they have a unicarpal, so we have several bones in our wrists. They have one. And that interclavicle, I said, I think these beings might be able to go on 4 legs. And if they have that chimpanzee DNA, that would make sense, right? Showing you some of the implants, the metal hip implant in Alberto, the chest implant on Louisa. You can see Montserrat has several implants. There's that gold disc. And who is that? I forget her name. And one of the large hands. That's Clara, I think. Or Edgarda. Maybe it's Edgarda. There's so many specimens. This is just to demonstrate that, yes, metallurgy was done. And depending... Oh, Edgarda. There's her name right there. Yep, Edgarda. Some may have osmium in it. Osmium also takes a large-scale industrial production to make a small amount of this metal. Some of the eggs, if you look closely, you can see those black dots. Those black dots are typical of how an eye would appear in a scan, almost like little shrimp. Oh, okay.
The eggs of the tridactyl specimen known as Artemis. The eggs appear to be in a state of hatching. What one expects to find in the eggs of a tridactyl are pig dragons. Pig dragons were made by the Hongshan culture circa 3500 BC, give or take 1,000 years. Oh, is that one there? Let's follow that anomaly, that appendage off of the large massive egg. There it goes. We have the upper view, looking down. We're looking upwards at its chin. Is that a face of a tridactyl fetus? Is this the face of a pig dragon?
So I'm kind of proud of that one because, again, none of the other researchers specified any finds of any larval forms. Galecki suspected that there was larval forms in the eggs of, I think, Josephina. So here we go. Here is one that I discovered, and then one from a scan. And again, what I'm suggesting is that these are front limb first amphibian-like development. This is the inside of an egg, inside of one of the larvae, and it appears as though there might be eggs within the larva, making it possible that they could be born pregnant. There's your tubular heart, almost indiscernible. Do you know of any other cultural artifacts that don't have lungs, heart, or stomach? Anyone? How about Egyptian mummies? Why do they take those organs out? And again, my parietal pineal complex, super proud of this. Once the scan came out, I saw it right away, right where I suggested it would be, in that indentation of the kappa. So this, of course, demonstrates that it is some sort of reptilian, because reptilian amphibian, it's sort of, I call them proto-amphibians, but they sort of defy category. And again, a close-up of that third eye, right? How big is third eyes in people's mythology? You can go to the New Age store today, and people are talking about the third eye, your pineal gland. Well, here it is. That myth is probably stemming from these guys. This is just an exaggerated version of what I suggest is that connection between skull and body. And I'm suggesting that perhaps, we didn't really discuss this, but the bodies have experienced a lot of operations. So I don't know if because of some sort of hybrid process that perhaps the birthing is not as simple as they would like, and perhaps these larvae, since they're being born within, maybe they're getting lost within the body, causing us to have certain operations, perhaps maybe even where our cesarean sections come from, or if you're familiar with trephination, where they have to put holes in people's heads to remove evil spirits. Is that all stemming from this? Showing you those spinal eminences again. And then lastly, this just goes in again to say, if we have all these traits, then do these creatures straddle the invertebrate-vertebrate line? Are they a literal missing link? And then this just confirms that Victoria, if you extrapolate off of her unknown, it coincides with this date very closely. Her unknown DNA means we have to keep going back until that DNA becomes lost to us, because we do have plenty of DNA. Okay, before we continue, I would like to ask if there's any questions from the audience. Please, at least one. At least one question, make up something. Two. How about you?
How did you come to get so involved with this?
Okay, well, that is the next slide in a way. So I recognized the cordiform heart-shaped face and the tridactyl limbs from a 2002 anthropology class. What's weird about this particular memory is that, do you guys remember things from school from 20 years ago? I don't remember a lot. But I remember asking my professor, hey, is there any connection between these artifacts in Canada and these artifacts in the Caribbean depicting the same beings? He says no. And I remember that answer as well. Well, we're going to look into a way my professor wasn't quite right. Would anyone like to take a short break? No? We're good? We're going to continue on then, right through. All right. Yes?
This was from 2002, and knowing you personally, I know that you got into it, a few years ago. What made you, remember this and, really started going in? What was it, recently that was,
it was literally, I think I said, I know what these are. I've seen them before.
Oh, you saw them. Okay.
I saw them in the petroglyphs in 2002. And for some reason, I remember even asking my professor about that specific incident.
And where did you see them again recently to where it clicked?
In Mexico, when I saw the live bodies.
Okay, the live bodies, that's right. Okay.
Yeah, and then my research took me into different directions all over the world. virtually.
So is this a study of both, like, is it archaeology and anthropology combined?
Well, archaeology is part of anthropology.
Right.
So,
Got it.
yeah. So anthropology, a lot of times if you think of anthropology, it could be the guy who lives with the tribesmen and writes down everything he does.
Right.
That might be a true anthropologist. But archaeology is a derivative of that. What's funny, too, is like with the skeptics, I would get in arguments with people. And one guy said, well, you know, maybe one of us could have a leg to stand on if they were an archaeologist. So but then when you tell them you're an archaeologist, guess what the skeptics do? They move the goalpost. So, just funny. So let's see what I discovered. Yeah? Yes?
If they give you like one shot to prove them that you have physiological evidence, which one would you pick? I know there's several.
Oh, which body would I pick?
Which physical evidence?
Which physical evidence?
Like you have 3 minutes to. Which one would you pick? Which is the strongest that stands with you?
That tubular heart's pretty, because once, again, you know, we can look at the surface finds and see the 3 fingers, and I can say that's probably an amphibian, right? But that's just like a surface body thing. It could be any different things. But then we got to the fact that they have no lungs. Oh, well, it's got to be an amphibian. So that tubular heart, that implies something else. That means if it is an amphibian trait of a young amphibian, why are they retaining it throughout life? How are they able to retain neotenic traits, youthful traits like that? And so, and again, and if we can prove if we could prove the hydrostatic limbs, that would be great, because that definitely implies. And again, the hydrostatic limbs are in the archaeological record, so I don't even sweat this anymore. The archaeological record is predicting the biology. And don't believe me, I found that third eye, right? Okay, so these 2 on the left are probably 2 of the ones I really kind of associate with my memory, especially that one. And I had mentioned we have people from the Caribbean. These things are found, these types of petroglyphs are in Puerto Rico, in the Dominican Republic, in Haiti, etc. And you can see the 3-fingered limbs here. You can see, of course, the cordiform or heart-shaped faces. And this might even be a sign of an anomalous limb, quite possibly. This could be an egg right here. But it is suggested that these 3 are actually mother goddess imagery. I suggest that the evidence of these may go all the way back to Ice Age Europe, as we find cave paintings with our hashtag symbol, which we use, right? Which I suggest is based on their skin. But you might be able to find a hashtag on your own skin too, and it gets a little dry. There's a little cross-hatching sometimes. I'm not sure, but I heard chimps do not have that. Of course, the heart and the tridactyl limb. Wow, what's that? That's weird. I don't know why that did that. Maybe just an extra slide. So, you know, I was going to document all the artifacts and all the petroglyphs. And I realized there are plenty of websites that have already documented petroglyphs. And there's someone probably back from 2016 when these bodies first became known to people. Keep in mind that too, right? These things have been kicking around. It feels new, but it's been kicking around for a while. But someone in France, or at least a French speaker, has already done the due diligence of collecting a lot of these imagery. Look at that little guy over there. I haven't researched this one, to be honest. I'm assuming it's legit because everything else is, but I need to find that one. That one's cool. And again, just more. These are Canada versus, actually, these are both Canada, I believe. Actually, no, I don't remember now. That might be Caribbean. They're so similar. They're so similar, and they're found all over the world. There's ones in Russia that look like this. This was when I started to realize, oh, these were everywhere. Now, can you see the tridactyl head? Yes? No? Because when I showed this to skeptics, they're like, all I see is a guy. That guy's not a tridactyl. It's the whole thing. So it just goes to show you how simple the steganography is that is hiding the message. And I think this message is something else too. So there is a motif of man born from a head, man born from mouth. Some Oceania. So I'm not sure the culture on this one. I just threw them in there. I still don't want it to overwhelm you with imagery. So these are from Oceania, some heart-shaped faces. Also, this one here demonstrates a trinity of beings. That seems to be a theme within the world religion. These are splash guards. So these are on the front of boats. They're said to represent the ancestors that guided people through Oceania. I thought this one was cool because it looks like it may even have some sort of implant there. Up here we have a piece I call the Child, which is like a serpentine stick figure. Spirals are frequently associated with these petroglyphs, as well as the mother goddess. The spiral, I believe, is a water symbol. Well, actually, other archaeologists believe it's a water symbol. I believe it's specifically a water symbol because it's showing the spawn rings that you would see in water. Imagine if you can see this in Florida. If you have things that are active under the water, they make these concentric circles. So, South American artifacts, right where these guys were found. This demonstrates that these people knew about these things for a long time. And look, where's a good one? This one here, look at those anomalous limbs, I call them. Just doing whatever they want. This one's kind of cute up here, isn't he? I mean, it looks like a modern cartoon. Did they capture the color also? So this Heitiki was another big thing for me. Because the Heitiki, the Maori to this day say is an ancestral figure. The Maori today say that is a depiction of an ancestor. So this here, a creator being. Uh-oh. I don't think you're supposed to hold on to it, the button. Okay, so right here is a creator being from Easter Island. So everyone knows about Easter Island, but there's a whole cave on Easter Island full of imagery like this. It's another good one here I like. They look like little gingerbread cookies of E.T. And there's so many of those, these Syrian eye idols. These are three of my favorites, just showing three different parts of the world: Japan, Mesopotamia, and Oceania, all with their cordiform-shaped heads and sometimes tridactyl limbs. If you're looking for these artifacts, don't get disappointed if you don't see tridactyl limbs. I think you're going to find them more so in recent cultures. So the Maori and the Taino, the Caribbean, these are two of the last places that were colonized by humans and colonized by Europeans later. So they stayed in a pristine state, so the artifacts are still there. It's still a part of the culture. Showing a wide variety of the Syrian eye idols, or the Tel Brak idols of the eye goddess. That sounds sexier. Fun looking, huh? Some European ones, Permian animal style. So these are anywhere from Mongolia to Finland. You can find things like this. I think it's kind of important because it shows you almost these intimate portraits, as though somebody was familiar with these beings living in familial units. I suspect that the ancients are aware of the metamorphosis of the beings. So shapes like this Magatama, which again, you know, it's bread and butter for me when people don't know the origins of something. Then it's like, we don't know what the origin is. It's just they just like it. And that's my chance to move in. Because that Magatama, to me, looks like it could be a larval form. And then the pig dragon, well, that very well could be the beginning of a metamorphosis stage. And then this is Ganesh. This is the head of the elephant. Whoops, I keep hitting the wrong buttons. This is the head of the elephant of Ganesh. But Ganesh, to the Tamil people, is also known as the child. And even Sadhguru, the Indian aesthetic, says it's not about him being an elephant, it's about his body being in the shape of an elephant's head. This is some statues of the Naga, which are supposed to be snake people. I don't know. I've seen quite a few snakes in my day. I don't think any of them have groovy little noses like that. So I started to put together that there was a belief in a mother serpent goddess across the world. And I thought the Naga of Hinduism was the best analysis for this. And so I've come up with my own nomenclature. I call them the Nazca Tridactyls, until science comes up with another name. So now we're going to start getting into my weird theories. This is where, to some, it'll get interesting. I have several hypotheses that are related, that have all spawned from this grand discovery. One of them is the have no graven images theory. That is, the images of tridactyls have been hidden in various cultures over time, demonstrating that people knew about them and demonstrating that the steganographic technique, the technique of hiding things in art, was also a cultural trait that was diffused to other peoples. The second one I call the theotherianthropic grapheme hypothesis. I purposely came up with something super long. That means the godly beast men letters. This letter here is one of the oldest letters in Chinese history. It appears to have anomalous limbs, but yet its meaning is heaven or God. Lastly, the Naga morpheme theory. That's the theory that the sound in human language is coming from the Naga. And I noticed it in not just the words for Naga, but for words that had the word lake in it. Words that mean lake in Asia. So that word, or that suffix, that morpheme, was ang. And that ang, in my opinion, looks like it may have traveled to Europe, where we have the anguillas, which is eels, and maybe even the word angels. This is the start of steganography. Now, as a skeptic, you might say, Ed, that's a sheep. Okay, it's kind of a ram, but sure, it's a sheep, it's a ram. But there's things you have to realize about this. That's not just a ram. That's the god Amun, a creator being. This one too, Kum, a creator being. And they seem to be replicating the same mother goddess imagery of a greater being in a protective form over a child in the center of the chest. Another interesting thing about the steganography is that the ears, which I suggest are actually the hidden eyes of a tridactyl, the ears have the cross-hatching pattern in them. Suspicious. So this was my first clue that suggested, oh, the ancients are hiding these things. Okay, so everybody close your eyes and open them just a little bit, squinting just a little bit. Can you see it? Is it working? Maybe not. So this is a tree of life. I suggest this is a steganographic concealment of a tridactyl head. And you might even see different images. Perhaps these are eyes up here. But two large eyes, mouth, and arguably a third eye is even predicted in the center. So here is a statue of a Yakshini, a female dwarf of Hinduism, called Yakshas, the males. And I had a theory, oh, these Yakshas, they're metallurgists, they're making things for the gods. Oh, this is the equivalent of the Western Norse dwarves, isn't it? Back again. So check out this statue of a little guardian being. Now this statue is flanking a human-sized tall being. This is sometimes called a supportive being because they support the gods. But I saw right away, as I said, I already had an inkling that these beings were already representatives of the tridactyls. So what's going to happen over time, our mythology and our beliefs in these are going to evolve. And they're either going to become like our tree of life, and they're going to become highly stylized, or they're going to become highly anthropomorphized and become a human. But I suggest that this statue is actually a steganographic concealment of a hyper-realistic head of a tridactyl within the arms. And I call this motif the arms as face motif. And so here are several different statues from around the world demonstrating this arms as face motif. You can see I've isolated the being here. You can see its stereanthropic, that is beastly little nose, and its temporal bones, which are these triangular bones that come off the side. These are Egyptian. Note the color too. We have that faience color, which is it's like a copper that they paint on. It's like a copper blue paint. They may use some other stones to make it too. I think that the faience and jade, you're all familiar with jade, I think these are colors that represent the beings. So I also had a theory that our ionic columns were in fact steganographic concealment of the beings. We call those volutes eyes, don't we? Now you could stop right there and say, well, that's nothing, Ed. But it turns out those ionic columns and Corinthian columns were originally found at goddess temples. Many times these goddess temples were built over springs. Many times they were associated with serpents and healing. So I suggest that this little guy here and his head may have spawned, and this is like the just like the eye idol, right? That's just a stylized version of the eye idol. So this was part of the clue where I suggested, okay, so if this represents this guy, I bet you this evolved into this. And then we have some other likely candidates that help develop these pillars, Hathor pillars and the Asherah poles. Those are from Semitic pre-Yahweh religion. And I think this is one of the more damning things. I hope you can see it. Again, it's steganography, so you might not see it right away. There's a few things involved here. One is perspective anamorphosis, meaning the perspective of the observer is dependent on what you see. So with these pillars, you have to be at the right angle, the right distance, and I suggest there might be one other qualifier, and that is you have to be aware of the beings. If you're not aware of them, you're not going to see it. So this is the side view of a World Heritage Site that Egyptian tourists go to every day. And I suggest what you're looking at is the cordiform head, supraorbital arches, and that upper maxillary plate right there. Yeah, and if you squint, it comes into view, right? That's why, like, I tell some people, like, don't enlarge it. If anything, look at a thumbnail or step back. Squint your eyes. That's part of the perspective, right? Because the farther you get away, the image starts to draw in. I even think our cornucopia, our Thanksgiving symbol, too, because it somehow evolved from like, look at this dude. I mean, it's somebody clutching a lizard person, right? I'm not making that up. It somehow evolved to these weird serpentine-looking things. And that's when I saw that. I'm like, well, he's like holding it like it's a baby or something. And that was a clue. Well, it turns out there is the myth of Zeus, and he is fed by a she-goat, and the she-goat gave information and knowledge. So. And just again, a compilation. This is Bayon Temple. Everyone can probably see the two human faces on the side. I suggest that's a distraction, and that it's actually is the mouth here, and the nose-mouth area of the humans actually make up the sleepy eye of the tridactyl. And then this one I purposely blurred because I wanted to encourage that perspective anamorphosis to occur. Born of the mouth motif, why would this be? Well, I don't know if you know, but many amphibians have gastric brooding and mouth brooding. That means the babies are either born alive within, or they may even carry them in their mouth. And so I suggest that, again, the ancients were well aware of the tridactyl life ways, and these are some of the impressions. In fact, if you look at that one, let's go back up. If you look at this one here, it has a little cordiform head like you might find on a pig dragon. I do have a pig dragon. I believe it's a replica. Got a nice weight to it, though. If you want to take a look at that pig dragon later. I have another motif called the hold your head up motif. And I thought of this before this specimen came out. So I suggest, since the originals had pneumatic skulls, that perhaps the hybrids lost the pneumatism, lost that pneumatic skull, and the skulls may have been too heavy for their necks. And so this is why we have this motif. Look at this one. This one's super cute, right? Some of these are super cute. This is why I don't think these are the scary aliens that people talk about. If they're associated with mother goddesses and creation, and I suggest their head spawned our heart emoji, how bad are they? These guys are kind of cute too. Look at them. Adorable. And I brought back the, that's Harpocrates, who is the Greek Horus. And there's pictures of him holding his head up. I've also suggested that Victor Victoria, again, I'm suggesting these are individuals from history, not just random specimens that you see at a museum. And so here is a series of seated gods. And you can see they have a variety of different looks. Some are more, well, I just realized I'm missing one. You start to collect all these artifacts, you know, in your head here. Yeah, so I suggest that the seated god may just very well be Victor Victoria there. Close-up of the fingerprints, but also a close-up of a wall in China. Were they putting this pattern on the stone megalithic walls to say, hey, I literally put my fingerprint on it. Guess who made this? Those of you who are Florida archaeology fans, how excited am I to find a connection when I realized that a Florida pottery shows the cross-hatching pattern, creating these little diamonds of the skin. We may have somewhere in a museum tridactyl skin impressions. Hell, we might even have actual fingerprints. Talk about a smoking gun, right? So my other theory is that the depictions of these beings can be found in our alphabet. I suggest on one of the skulls there appears to be it's not that style a older Greek A. It looks like it's carved in on the skull. What does that mean? There's our Chinese ones again, right? Tian for God. Serpentine beings. This is Ka. That is the first letter. So somehow, this is part of my studies, it's very strange, some of it, is how Ka became perhaps Ya and Ah over time. That Ka is a primary letter. And so it led me to suggest, oh, was Ka some sort of god? Are the primary letters depicting these beings? And just going over everyday symbols that I suggest are all influenced by tridactyls, from the heart-shaped face to the ionic eyes to their cornucopia-like body as they evolve. The shamrock could be a depiction of a trinity of heart-shaped beings. Your paisley, which has, do you ever notice that the paisley has shapes within it? The paisley has like littler shapes. I've always been suspicious of this symbol. Okay, well it is, guess what? It is a symbol of fertility. So I'm not going off on a limb here. What I'm suggesting is the ancients were well aware of the metamorphosis of these beings. The floor could be a, oh, I keep hitting the wrong button. The floor could be, I suggest, is a mother goddess imagery. So it's two anthropomorphic beings. The peace symbol, we all know it as an original symbol, but it's also a rune. So when I showed you the earlier runes, you saw the runes were upright. For some reason, the runes become inverted and placed at the end of the alphabet of this runic language. To me, that suggests something.
Yeah, and it also the circle means encompassing, so it's encompassing that.
So did we defeat the Tridactyls? And sorry if you're the religious folk, but I suggest ultimately the cross is, we could say it's a hand, but I think ultimately it is the form of the beings as young. So in my studies, it turns out one of the first, and so moving away from speculation here, this is science, one of the first migrations of what we call Homo sapiens was out of Africa to Tibet. What? Why is that the first location? And second of all, one of the first return migrations came from Tibet back to Africa. Now, this goes along with a theory, I believe it's the Dogon people, who suggest that the mother serpent, mother goddess, continues to breed with the next generation. What's that called? It's, I think in genetics they call it like backlogging or something. So that's part of the myth. Also in Tibet, part of their creation story is some ogreous woman had children with a monkey man, and that's how babies, humans, were made. So I thought this was interesting. I started tracing the sound of ka and how it relates to these hand symbols. So that is ka in Egypt. This is coming out of the Indus River Valley. This is Chinese. I think the full pronunciation is kao, and it also means grass. So does that mean grass as in how tall and maybe how green these things are? And I suggest possibly that's Sri Lanka, because that is one of the earliest depictions of ka, and it is also a cross. This is that Naga morphine I suggested. So I traced the serpent cult back to India, and it seems like along the Himalayan ridge is where the Naga cult originates. There's still temples there. And again, these people are in August, or no, at the end of July. Anybody want to go? We can go to the Naga Panchami and take part in the Hindu Naga festival. It's still it's a thing that's alive today. And so this just demonstrates how Nag can become Ang or Ing. And you can just see that this NG sound is all over. Now, I've had to rectify, like, well, what's up with the West Africa? So I suggest, and we'll probably get to another slide, that there was a global empire. You've heard of Atlantis? This might be them. This is more speculative on my part. So my suggestion is that human language started in the Himalayas and near what's called Gobi Desert. But at one time, it was a megalake region. So this could have been a primate Eden. We're noticing now that Neanderthals and the other species, Denisovan, is coming from Eurasia. It's coming from. This is why some people have a problem with the out of Africa theory. But really, it's both. You got to have both. And if you're going with that, the mother serpent is continually mating with her descendants, what's going on? Are they becoming more human here, and then she sends them out into the world? And now go mate, go breed. And look at that, we're all related to each other. So why do I suggest that this were proto-languages, your Tower of Babel? Because if you were to create a sort of central point, and if you documented what are known as the homelands to these languages, the homelands appear to be right around an outside perimeter. So I suggest there is evidence of a proto-language, that morpheme is evidence of it. And there's other weird things too. I think languages are way closer than we think. I keep seeing like strange coincidences. Look, I was taught independent innovation. That means this guy made up the same thing as this guy over here, thousands of miles apart. I don't believe that anymore. That's just coincidence. That's anthropology after saying that everything is culturally diffused, now saying, except for that, that's a coincidence. I don't believe in coincidences anymore. So part of my theory is the yam could be a clue to a global empire, because in Africa specifically, they suggest that scientists suggest that yams are indigenous to all these different places. That's what the original thing was. But in reality, when you go back to the genetics, the yam's coming from Southeast Asia. So how did it get to Africa? How did it get to the New World? Well, it's really simple. These oceanic routes have been here forever. So this route here has been known for some time, which is why I suggest why that Africa could almost, this West Africa is like, how come there's so many similar cultural traits? Well, for some reason, that's where they decided to start their culture, maybe because that's where the apes are. That's where the chimps, the gorillas are. But oddly, why are orangutans way over here all by themselves? Recently, again, not speculation, scientists have looked into orangutans, and it looks like there may have been genetic manipulation over time, and that these orangutans might be sort of a seed capsule in case something goes wrong. So we have all of our genetic information might be right there in orangutans. Orangutans are essentially more genetically advanced, more genetically evolved than we are. They've gone through more stages. And now someone's probably watching this video. Please feel free to check my science on all of this. Sometimes I don't even explain things very well. I'm all about evolving and adapting myself. So if you provide information, I will update my retelling of this. Great find that was just purely accidental, really, is that these two locations, the Sphinx and Lion's Rock, line up within a degree of the most holiest mountain in the world, Mount Kailash. At the base of Mount Kailash is a saltwater lake that is said to be associated with the Rakasha, another ogress type, a non-human being. So this was cool. And I also think the Lion's Rock kind of looks like a tridactyl head. At the base of Lion's Rock are these. And I suggest that part of the draw to Mount Kailash, it could be just a general pareidolia that people enjoyed, with this kind of representing a wide-eyed tridactyl. But then another part of that's what's important about pareidolia. We can say we're seeing something in something, but to the ancients, pareidolia may have been of grand importance because it reminded them of something. So perhaps one of the reasons Mount Kailash is so holy is that this pareidolia here appears to have perhaps a human head coming off of it. Perhaps part of that man from the mouth motif. So Ka, I suspected, was a god. And of course, we know Thor and Zeus and all these guys. Nobody knows Ka. Well, it turns out, sure enough, in the Nilamata Purana from 650, keep in mind, too, whenever there's a date, if this is a religious thing, oral tradition probably predates that by who knows how long. So it turns out in this book that documents the history of the Nagas, it says Ka is the creator. And when I saw that, I was just like, boom, bingo. I knew he was a god. That's why they were putting him in the beginning of the alphabets. So that could be possibly, this is Mount Rushmore. This is on the left side of Mount Rushmore. But it's also known as the six grandfathers before Mount Rushmore showed up. And so they call this Thung. So we got our Naga morpheme, Thung Ka Sila, which could mean the great Naga Ka land, something like that, if I were to do my own folk etymology. This is a Taino piece from the Caribbean. I suggest that this famous cave painting, which people suggest is a vulva, is actually a tridactyl being making a hand signal here. And this horned serpent might even relate to something like this tridactyl skull with the cranial ridges on top of it. We're almost done here, guys. So I did want to just demonstrate to you again, this is a modern living thing. This isn't just theory. So these beings here are tattooing themselves like the ancestors. I mean, these guys have that same tridactyl temporal bone that we saw in one of the statues. They have supraorbital arches. This guy over here appears to have the cross-hatching of the skin. This could be a replica of our interclavicle furcula. And of course, this woman here, they practice that neck extending because they want to emulate the dragon mother. These are these people's beliefs. That's part of our problem, is that we've looked at everything through a Eurocentric Judeo-Christian viewpoint. So our whole world tends to focus on, like, Rome and Jerusalem. But meanwhile, there's a whole continent east of there with very rich belief systems that are much older than our own. And this is some using the AI to come up with some art to sort of depict the beings. And this one here just sort of giving you an idea of the theory. So non-human beings, the Tridactyls imprinted culture on humanity, influencing symbolic language and belief systems. Evidence of these human amphibians can be found in the archaeological record and the ancestral narratives worldwide. We were never alone. Conclusions. The Tridactyls of Nazca, Peru represent primate/proto-amphibian hybrid beings that corroborate with the post-flood cosmological narratives of ancestral tutelary beings that taught man culture and civilization, best exemplified by the Naga and the dragons of Asian belief systems. And you guys can start doing your due diligence. Start going to the museums. Even reinvestigate your own myths and religions of your own people. What are you going to look for? You're going to look for tridactyl limbs. You're going to look for heart-shaped faces, horns, cross-hatching patterns, spirals, and maybe even some striated lines emulating the fingerprints. That is from a clay vessel. These pictures were taken yesterday in Mexico. Dr. Greer, famous for his ufology, but what's really great here is this face on this representative from the U.S. government as he looks at one of the giant tridactyl hands. Those hands insinuate that that came from a 7 to 9 foot tall being.
So what is your,
Let's hold on. Let's wrap this up. So here's me, some of my background on the bottom there. I did run the anthropology club at FAU, the honors club. I have been an archaeologist. I sat on the board of the Archaeological Society. And I've worked closely with this gentleman here, Bobby De Palma. He is a famous paleontologist. He was featured on BBC's Attenborough. He is said to have discovered the CT Cretaceous Tertiary extinction point. And they demonstrate that by tiny metal sphericals they find. And of course, that is on US 1, I believe the dinosaur is still there today, where I used to work, where I met my camera person, Christy, and where actually one of our audience members had an intimate part in the Turkish house we had there. We had a miniature Turkish home where they donated their marriage dowry to be part of the display. How neat is that? And so special thanks to Christy Ballou for graphic support, camera, and editing. For further research, you want to check out my site so you can see my little science papers, my cultural analysis. Alienproject.com, you can interact with the CT scans yourself. Tridactyls.org, if you have a medical background, you can submit to have access to the CT scans and x-rays, which again, I'm proud to say we juked Joe Rogan on. It took Joe Rogan over a year to even come around to the story, and now he's finally showing the scans. And those big pictures of all the different artifacts and all the different petroglyphs and stuff, I have to give credit to these people. This is their site in English called The Little Beings and Ant People. I have to thank them for all their hard work. Yeah, definitely take a picture of that if you want the information. And that is a wrap.
That was wonderful.
You open for more questions?
Now it's time for more questions. I think Tawana had one first, though, right?
yes, I wanted to say, so after all of this, is it more to say is what happened in the past, or do you still feel like we have constant companions right now? Like it's still...
Well, if you consider all the modern abductee stories who describe little three-fingered beings with big heads, it would seem as though they're still active.
And in your opinion, obviously this is just pure speculation.
Yes.
What are they doing, or why aren't they showing themselves? Like, what is it? Like,
Well, perhaps there became a point where we were no longer on good terms. After all, how many tales are there of humans fighting the dragon or defeating the dragon mother Tiamat? Or so did we rebel? Was it an inner rebellion from her own kind? Did her own kind say, you know, we got to stop this? Or maybe our earliest heroes were hybrids.
There's a 70s film that was very psychedelic, and it features those type of tall, like, reptilian-looking beings and humans, and there's, like, they were, like, enslaved and they started rebelling against them. I'll find it,
Okay, yeah, I mean, that is a story in a lot of science fiction. So did we rebel, and should we be regretting it today? Are we devolving? Is culture going downhill? Can we build the pyramids today? So maybe we needed them. In fact, maybe we needed their constant interventions. Maybe that's what they're doing. That's what you asked me, like, what could they be doing? Are they intervening to ensure that we continue? You know, there's an entire continent, Antarctica, that for some reason it's like the only place they don't want to drill, it seems. That could be a whole continent for subterranean beings to be underneath. Every World Heritage Site, from a temple to a pyramid to a stupa, could very well be just a ground placement for an underground culture. More questions?
So how do modern archaeologists or historians explain the global spread of these idols throughout history?
They haven't. They haven't yet. And so that's where we're at. That's why a lot of this is very new. What happened with me was, besides having a near existential moment, if you will, and a bit of realization, you know, it was October, it was the night of the eclipse, and I got up and said, I got to write this shit down.
Not like any specific, it's just they like say an event.
So what my professor said, it's independent innovation. So we just coincidentally drew the same thing. Does that make sense? So that's what we're going to have to find out. I think part of the problem is that I'm going to call this is my mask face. I found mask faces in Russia. And then someone over here is going to be like, I found mother goddess imagery in the Caribbean. And then everyone's going to have their own different name for it. So no one's putting together that this is one big thing. And part of, again, my existential moment, if you will, was these bodies somehow gave my brain permission to make new connections and to see things. Once my brain realized, oh, these are real. That's what everyone needs to do. Everyone's going to have to do that on their own. Their brain's going to have to tell them, oh, these were once living things. How did they influence us? I have today, guys, I have a model tridactyl head to give away. But you're going to have to roll for it.